This whole thing started on a road trip around 4 years ago. We left to go from North Carolina to the East Coast, traveling through the Midwest. It was me, my wife Kimmy, her 7-year-old daughter Katie, and 5-year-old son Alex. Everything went fine for the first few days. We took our time with the trip because we weren't really on a constraint in that regard. We stopped at pretty much every landmark one could see whilst making a cross-country trip, but there was one night in a state in the Midwest I won't name that would lead to a series of events that still hasn't ended. It was around 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and we collectively decided to stop at the next place we saw to eat. We saw a sign to exit at the next ramp for a place called Daisy's Diner. We get there and nothing seems amiss. It was just about dark. We decided that after we'd eaten, we'd find a hotel for the night. Daisy's Diner was a classic little town eatery with road signs on the wall and a waitress that called everyone hun. Had a very classic small-town USA feel to it. The food had a home-cooked taste to it, too. I could certainly imagine this place being at its capacity on any given day. However, at the time we were there were only 4 other people in the restaurant. A man and a woman ate together at a booth, while 2 men separately sat at the counter. All 4 of the other patrons left before we did, and were replaced with 2 more men who came in at separate times. It was the last man to come in to bring what had happened to our attention. He informed me that if I was the one with the Hyundai truck outside, it had been ransacked. I ran outside, and sure enough, the passenger side door was open and everything had been rifled through. CDs were strewn about the streets. The paperwork from the glove box was on the passenger side floor. The backpacks my children had in the back seat with their belongings were open and gone through. I was furious. I demanded to see the camera footage, only to find out the cameras were essentially for show. I asked to know who the people were that had left the restaurant before us. The solitary waitress only personally knew one of the men. Vehemently vouched for him. Against my better judgment, I decided not to pursue neither him nor the other, still unidentified man. Instead, choosing to let the police handle the situation. I explained to the police that as far as I could tell, nothing had been stolen. No damage had been done to the car. The waitress gave the name of the one man that she knew, and the police knew him as well. Not because he'd had run-ins with the guy, but because he was a very active member in the local church, and was a man who was held in high regard by the entirety of the community. As for the other man, all I'd seen was his back. Ultimately, nothing was done about the break-in, besides filing of a record of the incident report and a casual keep an eye out from the police. I assumed the other man in the diner had seen our vehicle full of our belongings out of our line of sight and seized the opportunity. Carpe diem, you piece of shit. We were directed towards a motel in the small town in which we had eaten. Since it was now close to midnight and my wife wanted to lay down and get some rest, we decided that we were safe enough to stay there. Being that it was a motel, there'd be other people there. Whatever logic I could scrape together is what I used to justify staying there, because I was admittedly too tired to keep driving. However, when we got to the motel, it was as close to something out of a horror movie as could be. The sign was missing letters, and there were only 2 other cars in the dirty parking lot. That said, though, the area was well lit and would provide adequate shelter for a few hours. The man who helped us at the counter had a strange vibe about him, but checking into the room went without any incident. Actually, until the morning, I thought the whole night had gone on without a hitch. When we were settled into the room and ready to get to sleep, I double and triple checked the locks on both the door to the outside and the door that connected to the next room. It wasn't an ideal situation, but such was the case that the only room with 2 queen beds was connected to another room. The clerk informed us that the only other person staying there was a woman at the complete other end of the motel, and went as far as showing us the room connected to ours was empty. We all slept okay. In fact, for much longer than we had planned. I woke up in the morning and opened the blinds to check on the car, which I had parked directly outside the room. Nothing seemed out of place, at least on the outside. There was a small piece of paper that had been slid under the door to the outside. Assuming it was a checkout receipt, I ignored it and got ready for the day's drive. After a shower, I sat on the bed to watch TV while my wife inevitably took 4 times longer than me to get ready. It was then that I decided to take a look at the checkout receipt. I picked up the once folded piece of paper and opened it. My heart sank when it turned out to be a drawing from my daughter's backpack, but with a slight change. It was a picture of our family, but the thief had added a crudely drawn version of himself to it, and the words, "Nice to see you." Being that the addition to the drawing was done in crayon just like the original artwork had been, there was nothing about the man I could discern. All I knew was that whoever had broken into our car had followed us to the motel and slid this drawing under our door. Or at least, that's what I thought. My son, the ever-questioning, observant young man that he is, was playing on the ground with some toys near the door and asked me what the rubber piece lining the bottom of the door to the outside was for. I explained that it was likely to keep things such as leaves and snow from blowing under the door and keeping either heat or cold air in. It was then that I realized that the rubber strip would have prevented a piece of paper from being slid under the door. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Whoever had set this drawing on our floor had done so from inside. I checked the locks on the connecting door and found one of them to be unlocked. In an effort to spare my wife and children the same horror I was currently experiencing, I just rushed them out under the guise that we'd slept late and I wanted to cover a lot of ground that day. I considered talking to the motel clerk, but by that time, a younger girl was working the counter and I wasn't going to stay there a second longer than I had to. We got back onto the highway without interruption and continued our trip. My wife asked me what was wrong, but I shrugged it off as being tired. We made the rest of our journey with nothing out of the ordinary happening, aside from the alarming incident at Daisy's Diner and the Galleria Motel. Our road trip was actually pretty fun. Our activities proved to be a good distraction from the uneasy feeling I had in the pit of my stomach. I made sure to take a different route home, so as to not pass through the small town where the incidents had happened. We finally returned home about 3 weeks later. All of our mail was piled up on our front porch, so I grabbed it as I walked back into our house for the first time in nearly a month. Unpacking and getting situated took precedent over looking through the mail, but I eventually got to it. And things began again. Towards the middle of the pile of mail, there was an envelope with no return address. I opened it and found a single handwritten note in a folded-up piece of paper. The girl is very good at pictures. I unfolded the paper and it was yet again another drawing of my daughter. This one was of a black and brown dog. I figured whoever was doing this had gotten our address from our vehicle's registration or some other kind of documents. After going through the car, I informed the police, who did a pretty shitty job of making me feel safe. I kept what happened from my wife as I knew she would just worry, and I wanted to keep our family as stress-free as possible. I wondered how many pictures my daughter had in her backpack, but in reality, I knew it was quite a few. I'll get to that later. Everything was fine for about a week, until one day we got back home from a day at the park. We got inside and the kids ran over to the couch and turned on the TV. My wife walked into the kitchen and started making the kids something to eat. I went to the bathroom, and when I got out, my wife was standing at the sliding door to our backyard. That's when I heard it. Barking. My thoughts raced, and I refused to believe it. It couldn't be. Sure enough, a black and brown German Shepherd, about a year old, was tied to a fence post in our backyard. By this time, our kids had heard the barking and came to check out what was going on. We all ventured outside, and I told them to stand back while I inspected the dog. The leash was tied to the post in a way to make it look like the dog had jumped over the fence and gotten caught on something. I don't know. It really didn't make sense. It just wasn't completely obvious that someone had placed the dog there intentionally. Upon meeting me, the dog licked my hand and rolled on his back to have his stomach pet. And the kids then rushed me and began showering the dog with love, which it wholeheartedly accepted. He seemed enthralled with the kids, who returned the affection and drove. My wife found a soft spot in her heart and pleaded with me to keep the dog. It went against my gut, as I knew what the dog was a result of, but in my ongoing efforts to shield my family, I reluctantly agreed to keep him. We named him Roscoe, a name my daughter picked. In a weird way, I felt like I was giving whoever was doing this exactly what they wanted. I knew this hadn't been a coincidence. I just didn't know why it was happening. This dog incident didn't come off as a threatening gesture. None of it made sense. The dog quickly became a member of our family. He took a particular liking to Katie, which of course made me uncomfortable. While I was naturally pleasant to the dog and made sure that he had a good life, there was a part of me that despised him, a part of me that hated what he represented, and that was the fact that there had been a strange man that had personally organized a dog based off of one of my daughter's pieces of artwork being placed in my backyard. I felt like he knew we kept the dog, and that the dog was happy here. I felt like he had done this before, and that he got off on it. But I had no way of knowing. I had already called the cops, and they essentially told me there was nothing to be done. The way I saw it, and I'm sure they would have agreed, is that I wasn't necessarily dealing with what would be called a stalker. I mean, sure, there was stalking qualities to what was going on, but since we'd been home, we hadn't been followed, as far as I could tell. We didn't receive strange phone calls. The only correspondence was the letter that I had hid from my wife. There wasn't exactly anything proactive I could do to protect myself and family, so I figured I'd just have to take everything as it came up. The end of the summer came. I always had a tradition. We would spend a week in my late father's cabin. Thought of canceling this year certainly crossed my mind, but I chose not to. There's nothing else had happened since we'd been gifted with Roscoe. So we packed up the car and made the 4-hour trip to the cabin, which was on the edge of a small town called Long Lake. Long Lake was a small town of cabins that people vacationed at. I don't think there were any permanent residents. The people who worked at the general store and restaurants there commuted from the town about 20 miles away. But this late in the summer, people were scarce, if even there at all. We all arrived at our cabin. A neighbor we'd come to know over the years, an older man named Floyd, who'd vacation there with his grandchildren, was packing up to leave for the year. Apparently he'd spent about 3 weeks up there, much longer than his normal week. Turns out his grandkids were feeling as if they were too old for the annual cabin trip. Yeah, I felt kind of bad for Floyd. I knew how much he looked forward to the trip. After introducing Roscoe to our annual neighborhood, we said our goodbyes to Floyd, who promised to return the following year, even if he did it alone. And I had the wife and kids start unloading the car while I went and unlocked the cabin. Before I approached the door, I stood there, looked off into the distance over the lake, and breathed in a big helping of fresh country air. Felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders being here, not having to worry every day. That'd be the day I got another one of my daughter's drawings in the mail. Felt truly at peace, even if only for that moment. That peace would quickly fade, though. When I got to the door of the cabin, it was already unlocked. Now, chances are it was just left unlocked from the previous year. I really had no ground to suspect anything other than that, even with everything going on. There was no way that the mystery man could have known where our cabin was, much less have gotten there before us. I'd kept a keen eye on the rear view on our trip to make sure we weren't being followed, just to be safe, and I had no reason to believe we had. I opened the cabin door and the air was heavy and moist. There was a thick layer of dust on everything the eye could see, amplified by the rays of sunlight coming in through the windows. Everything was exactly as it was a year prior. I breathed easy, taking solace in the fact that it was more than likely myself a year ago that had made me worry so much presently. I walked to the master bedroom and fumbled with the fuse box until the power came on. My family entered my cabin, my children wide-eyed with excitement. They ran to the other bedroom, which contained bunk beds, and immediately began bickering over who would get the top bunk. My wife went back outside to get another round of bags and suitcases while I got the water going. Knowing I had to personally get the electricity and water running gave me even more peace of mind. It meant that no one had been using these utilities in at least the past while, as evidenced by the dust. Things went well for the first day. We got settled, and I put off cutting the grass until the next day. We took a ride on the ATVs and played board games. The next day, I took my family to a spot across the lake that we'd taken the kids to every year. Had a small playground and an actual beach. There was a dock a little ways out into the water that my daughter was now big enough to play on while my wife and my son enjoyed trying to catch fish with his hands at the shore. We grilled out, had a nice meal, stayed there until almost sundown. My plan was to cut the grass when we returned home, but as we pulled into the small grassy area we used as a driveway, I noticed the grass was freshly cut. My heart once again sank into my stomach. My wife commented that a neighbor must have done us a favor and went on about her business. I looked around and every other lawn that I could see was still uncut. I knew who had done this. Well, not exactly who, but I knew. I truly was confused at the motivations of this mysterious stalker. So far, he had given us a dog who had quickly become a member of the family, and next he cuts the lawn of our cabin for us? A part of me almost considered just accepting what was going on as it seemed harmless. And that feeling only grew in me when nothing bad happened the next day, but then the fourth day came. It was about 7 a.m. and my wife took Roscoe outside so that he could run around and use the bathroom. She tied his leash around a post that had been designated specifically for him and went inside to start cooking breakfast. Roscoe was a quick learner, and in the short time that we had him, we trained him to do a few things. One of those things was to bark when he was ready to come inside. My wife cooked breakfast, and I woke up the kids. We all sat down to eat. It wasn't until we were nearly finished that Katie asked where Roscoe was. Strange, I thought, that he hadn't barked when he was ready to come in. I figured he was just having a good time enjoying the openness of nature around him. I told Katie that Mommy had put him outside and that I would go get him. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I walked out of the cabin. Roscoe was on the ground, and his throat had been brutally gouged open, so much so that he was nearly decapitated, and then from the horizontal throat cut was a vertical cut down his stomach. His innards had been removed from his body and placed next to him. His blood pooled on the grass around his small, lifeless body. Felt like I was going to throw up. I ran over to him. I looked at his wounds. I could tell that he'd been done by a blade of some sort and was not a random animal attack. Before I did see anything, I ran back to the cabin and told my family to stay inside and not look out the windows. I left before they could question me. As tears streamed down my face at the horror I was currently taking care of, I dug a hole for Roscoe. I gently placed him in the hole and pet his soft back one last time. I truly had come to care about the dog no matter where it come from. I filled the hole with dirt and went to put the shovel back into the shed. I don't know how I hadn't noticed it when I went to retrieve the shovel in the first place, but on the siding of the cabin was a message. A message written in what I assume was Roscoe's blood. It simply said, "Good doggy." I washed the message off before returning inside to my family. The entire time I'd been dreading explaining to them what had happened. I sat my kids down and told them that while we were inside, another animal, probably much larger than Roscoe, had gotten into a fight with him and hurt him to the point where he had to go to doggy heaven. My wife and children cried and I joined them. None of us could believe that we had just lost the newest member of our family. With this thought, I told everyone to pack up because it wasn't safe to stay in the area with such a large animal on the loose. They abided, and we were on the road within the hour. We stopped at the gas station just outside of Long Lake to get gas, pick up snacks, and use the restroom before we set out on our 4-hour-long road trip. We all went inside, and thankfully, I was the first to come out. I saw it from the gas station doors, an envelope under my windshield wiper. I sprinted to the car in hopes to get it before my wife saw it. I succeeded and immediately checked the area around me for someone, anyone. There was no one. No cars driving in either direction, and no one on foot anywhere for as far as the eye could see. I even made a circle both ways around the gas station and did a check inside the gas station itself and found no one that hadn't been there already. I wanted to ask the gas station clerk to see the security camera feed, but a cursory look around the place didn't reveal any cameras. That, and I didn't want to alert my wife to the note that I'd found. I waited for my son to get out of the bathroom and told everyone to wait by the door for me. Inside the bathroom, I opened the envelope and took out the folded piece of paper. This drawing was one of our house that Katie had done about a week prior to our road trip. I remember because I hung it up on the refrigerator when she finished, only for her to take it down to put it in her portfolio. This one depicted our family in a swimming pool in our backyard. The addition to the scene was the same crudely drawn man standing behind the fence with a pile of wrapped presents next to him. There was writing on the back of the picture this time too. We are a happy family. I didn't know what to think of this picture. My family and I had been swimming in our backyard countless times that summer, even after the incident in the Midwest, when my guard was 100% up. I was positive no one had been spying on us. My only rational guess was that the man had used the pool in place of the lake that we had swam in days prior, and the fence to be the tree line from which he could have been spying on us. Whatever the case was, I folded it up, I put it in my pocket, and I got my family and I the hell out of there. I took random back roads and out-of-the-way turns on the somber ride home, much to the confusion of my wife. I told her that I was checking something on the car. I was obviously seeing if anyone was following me, and again, I found no evidence of that. We returned home. The first thing I did was cover up the pool for the remainder of what was left of summer, much to the dismay of my family. I made up some bullshit about how the water levels had been affected by our absence, something that didn't really make sense, but got the job I wanted done. I wanted to tell my wife what was going on, I really did, but at this point I felt like I had already hidden so much that the focus wouldn't be on the issue at hand, but rather on my evasiveness, so I resolved to continue the charade. I was the protector of this family, and I was going to do just that. This wasn't anything I couldn't handle on my own, I told myself. In retrospect, I could have used all the help I could get.